Hello, everyone. Today I'm speaking with Kristina Dryža, and Kristina is an Australian-born Lithuanian. Kristina is recognised as one of the world's top female futurists and is also an archetypal consultant and an author. She's also on the editorial board of the Joseph Campbell Foundation. So welcome, Kristina.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Kristina, we're going to talk about myth today. And I just wanted to share one thing that I thought of this morning is when I was, because you've lived in Australia,
Yes, I was born in Australia, born and bred, yeah.
You're in Lithuania at the moment, but I remember being in the country of Western Australia in the rural community, and my mother used to go off to Perth maybe 2 or 3 times a year. And she came back one day with a book of Greek myths, and it was, I think on the cover was Jason chasing after the golden fleece, and I was absolutely entranced by that book and just excited to read it. And you know, you were saying maybe when we were talking a little bit before that. Myth in Australia, you know, that sometimes it's not part of the education, but just what I'm trying to say is like on that kind of gut, really kind of primitive level, just that response to those old stories, and I can always remember it.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, myself,
sorry.
I mean, Lithuanian, growing up in Australia, my family fled Lithuania during the Second World War. Yeah. The folkloric images, I think, were there at some level, though I might not have been directly aware of them. But yes, it was, you know, in university when I studied anthropology and indigenous cosmology, that I guess more the way that we'll speak about myth today came to me, but it was something that was really, really absent in those early years for me, both in my home life and also in the Australian sort of schooling system.
Well, that's the first question I want to ask you, because you have worked as a futurist, and how did Kristina the Futurist stumble across myth, which some people might say is way back from the far distant past, even though I don't necessarily agree with that. But how did that happen?
Well, I think then from anthropology at university, and obviously, you know, studying also the indigenous cosmology, and then obviously the Aboriginals, which are our inhabitants and owners of the land that I grew up in, recognizing how even the name dream time was seen as something that was like once in the past, and that we would be very respectful of the stories that we would hear of origin, of creation, of a rainbow serpent coming through here that made this billabong that created this, like, but it would be this either deference to something in the past that had nothing to do with now. And I liked like this term where dream time is like the codification and almost like the concretization, while dreaming is present continuous.
Yeah.
And I think many of us in our lives on various topics, it doesn't have to be, say in leadership, a good example would be innovation. But we make it a noun and not the verb. And so I love this idea of not dream time, but dreaming. And that is always occurring. And so I think that started that love there. But then from there, obviously going to London and studying like textile forecasting and getting then into trends. And so whether it was then the trends in fashion or then socioeconomic trends, things like that, then trends in business. And then it eventually led me to like patterns, but then more in nature. So I wrote an allegorical novel on seasonal, tidal, lunar, and circadian rhythms, almost like over a decade ago. Now it's more prescient, but so that idea of the cyclicalness, which I'd learned at university, like all time is one, getting out of linear time of like past, present, future, but actually all time is now, and seasons and cycles, and how the past is always present, but the future is also in the room too. But then the love of the natural patterns then led to, when working in a corporate environment, that I might be able to intuit a future, but actually it was the people around the boardroom's table, their own personal patterns, that actually prevented that future being born. And that was what really then began my love of archetypes. And then from the love of the archetypal patterns, it was then the mythic patterns. So myth is almost like the great pattern that underlies everything. Myths being the ancient storehouse and wisdom of what it means to be a human being. It was then the mythic patterns. So yeah, it started with like the patterns on the street, then the patterns in nature, then the patterns in us, and then more than the patterns in the cosmos and the patterns in the myths. So
I like how you talk
that's the
about
trajectory.
pattern. And
yeah,
it's kind of fitting for someone that was involved in the fashion world, but do you think you're good at detecting patterns? Is that something?
Yeah, I'd often sometimes say, why did I become so well known as a futurist? I would say it wasn't that I was good at predicting the future, but I could read patterns. And all of us can. We all speak archetype fluently. Like it's the whole thing, like you're walking down the street and that person's an environmentalist, they're a joker. It's not even the stereotype, but that we can see the light to destiny character arc within it. But just think about an alcoholic. They're always going to place whatever the thing that they're addicted to above their family, above their job, above their health. So you see where the pattern of addiction will lead. It's not that you're a good futurist. The pattern will tell you that.
Yeah.
And I think that's why pattern recognition is one of the key skills. Often people say, well, Kristina, you're a futurist. What should we be teaching our children? Is it, what language or what software language? And it's this pattern recognition, because it's by knowing the patterns, it's almost like I know myself and I know the world. It's the know thyself. Because in a way, with the pattern, what we see is what is changing and what is changeless. So at the moment in Europe, we have that, after summer, there is, autumn or fall, as they say in the States. But the summer that we had here was very, very different. It was very, very warm compared to last year, but autumn is still going to come afterwards. And I think that's why I loved those patterns in nature so much, and themselves as archetypes, which is, when someone's had a period of grief or depression, like a winter moment of their life, that archetypally there will be a rebirth, there will be a spring, there will be some joy that re-enters. It's archetypal. It cannot not be. You can't be in a forever persistent winter. Yeah. And I think that was where I started recognizing how knowledge of these patterns, understanding and awareness of them, really led to my own personal healing and to others, but a different conversation with the world.
So are you in service to the goddess Demeter or something? Because she was about all of that, wasn't she? Winter, spring.
My first, I guess, initiation into the myths was through Persephone. And again, obviously being here now, especially in Lithuania, where the seasons are more easily demarcated than they are in Australia. Sometimes it's more like I just have to put a jumper on, and that's the extent of the change of the seasons throughout the year. Yeah. And as we know, like in the indigenous, there's sometimes 6 or 7 different types of seasons in Australia, or the wet and just the dry in the north. But recognizing the seasons as metaphors a metaphorical feeling, not just something that's occurring outside for the 5 physical senses. I think that is something that we're returning to, whether it's seasonal eating, which brings like a greater locality to what we're kind of choosing, but recognizing, especially in Australia, like with so much sun, we can't always be out like all that. We can't live in this perpetual spring, perpetual kind of summer. And I did remember reading something quite interesting once, which was why is there such a high use of Botox in California? And people say, well, naturally it's Hollywood, it's that, but it's also when the temperature is almost quite even. You don't have, say, like in Europe at the moment, like where the leaves falling and that actual when the trees are bare, that withering, that complete withering, the pruning almost. That. So if we can't see aging externalized, then and around us with our very eyes, we want to kind of keep in that forever young, forever
keep under the sun at all times.
Yeah, and also destruction is the right hand of creation. It's almost like one without the other doesn't exist. And so I think there is this return to the seasons, and I think that the myth of Persephone is a wonderful entry point to that.
I think there's also like an official story, isn't there, like the straight upward path towards success, without the seasonal story of our psychic experience of the winters and the springs. So
I think that's something that hopefully myth can help us with, breaking out of this, especially in the corporate world, this absolute obsession with constant upward linear growth. That trajectory, instead of actually, can the growth model now be one around death and rebirth? And I think those are the myths that certainly most interest me.
Well, should we speak about Persephone first, or should we go on to why myth now? Why should we study myth? Which one?
No, I mean, we can start. We can definitely start with Persephone. I think that in a way, the way that it that myth came to me was I went to see a healer, and in a meditation, the image came to me of a young girl, the world, literally the earth being like this chasm, and out of the ground coming, this dark figure with the black horses and kidnapping her. And at that stage, I didn't know it was like the myth, but I knew to follow my intuitions and something like that. I'm one of those people that I will follow the breadcrumbs of someone says something, I'll Google it, I'll follow it up, and then to realize, oh, it was actually a myth. I mean, other people have different ways that a myth will come to them. But almost it really told the story of what the next decade of my life would be. And I think
so. Were you, just going back 1 second, were you kind of high flying, busy, racing around a lot, and then this other energy came in? Is that how we could describe it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was very I had no really understanding. I'd just written a little bit about the seasons. I didn't know too kind of much, but it was the difference, say, between Anana, which is like a conscious descent. The line of the poem, she puts her ear to the ground. Very, very different, versus for many people,
Persephone was taken.
It's a rug pulling. It's that thing where you're just like, whoa. But then it's like when you have an illness or a betrayal, so, well, why not me? It happens to everyone. But when it does happen, it's that, and then finding yourself with no way to orientate yourself, because the underworld works very, very differently to the upper world. And I think that one thing that over the years of, in a way, working with that myth, feeling it very intensely in my life, recognizing how so often we're trying to, when something happens to us that was unforeseen, or we're not even just, we're not where we want to be, we try to get out of it first by, in a way, either denying the situation and wanting to make it different, right? So there's no accepting of the situation, but also it's about like fixing or getting rid of, or it's very
eradicating the problem, maybe, or as my friend used to say in Sydney, doing more of the same but much harder.
All of that, I think the audience would understand that, but recognizing then that we're trying to breathe life into an old identity that is scheduled to change.
Yeah.
And I feel from my experience that a lot of transformation will only occur once there's been an identity shift. So just really, really simply, it's like, and I think most of the research kind of shows something like only like 1/5 of people make self-directed change in their lives. So you'll hear the drip, drip, drip of the tap, but only when it bursts do you call the plumber. You need to change your diet. You only do it after you've had the heart attack. Like you hate your job and you want to leave, but it's only when you're made redundant do you do something. And so it's almost like if we say the identity of the victim can't get us to do anything. But if you imagine, say with your health, and you just say, yeah, that's it, I'm jogging every morning, or I'm changing my diet, like the athlete and someone that just doesn't wear like, yoga pants as fashion, but like trains, is the one that can do it. And so what I found with that myth was when Persephone descends, like she's Kore, Kore, like almost like this innocent maiden, but that's not the one that actually rises. And so to lose that identity of Kore and to find the new identity, which comes through marrying Hades, through the marriage of death, to be able to become the queen, only then can she rise. And
I
just
agree.
A quick point also on that control, like it's like we want to get out of a situation when so often there's a greater timing. So it's like we can't plant seeds and then say now blossom and be ready in 1 week, or why aren't you? It's almost like the underworld has its own rules and its own timing. But I just feel that for many things in life, that identity shift is actually crucial. But not that you then say, as another example, people say that the saboteur is an archetype. It's not that I am a saboteur, but that the pattern of sabotage is active in me. I don't make it my identity, because then that sometimes feels that it's all I am. So I think that's the wonderful world of myth, is the paradox, which is we need the shift in identity, but also then not to be so identified with it as well. And that's, I think, the world that myth gives us, the complexity. And, what's that quote of, the sign of intelligence is being able to hold two opposing viewpoints in the mind at the same time and not go insane. That now is not intelligence. That's our everyday. But because we're so, from the pandemic, we're like these peaches that don't have any skin. We're very fuzzy. We're still so bruised. We're very emotionally dysregulated. The relationship we had with the media, because we had to tie into it for our survival. What were the restrictions? What was this? What was that? We can't almost hold that complexity, and we compress ourselves down to either like simplistic binary arguments, or we go back to our past habitual and repetitive behavior, even though we don't want to, but because of the comfort of familiarity.
There's a few things about what you said in there. Firstly, I think there's this tendency to think, perhaps at times, oh, why? To try to get back to the status quo or whatever, right? But it's, I think James Hillman said, like the naive innocence might need to go, and that's what that deepening is, kind of getting rid of that old skin which had a naive innocence about it, even though that doesn't mean it's an easy process, but there's something good in all of that. That's a deepening.
Yeah, but I think that there's, so many of the things that, saved us as children, as adults, are the patterns and traits that now really harm us. Like maybe disassociating as a child was a very safe thing to leave your body. Maybe your home environment wasn't safe. But then as a grown adult, now it's very dangerous. And I think that naivety that you were speaking to, that's the part that had to be kidnapped in the underworld. But then almost in a sense, there's a difference in the sense between like being like childlike and childish, and it's the same dance and nuance, I think, with that innocence. Yeah.
There's different kinds of innocence, isn't there? But the second thing I was taking from when you were talking is about the complexity, and like things are so different down under there, aren't they? Because it's not just a daylight world with the kind of moral stable order, but then there's something great about that too, because that's paradox, ambiguity. That's kind of more built around reality, you know?
Yeah, the not knowingness. And I think that, you know, say people are suffering, say, from depression or anxiety, we can use the left brain in the upper world to read a magazine article that might have very good advice from qualified experts, which would be something like make sure you're well hydrated, get enough sleep, maybe write a gratitude list, exercise. But when we're in the underworld, really the closest we can get with language is poetry. And I think it's David White, you know, poetry is the only language against which the heart is defenseless. But it's actually the myths, the archetypes, the symbols, music. It's almost like we're far better off watching something on Netflix that archetypally resonates, that the right brain can do something with that. That's its nourishment, because in the underworld, there is a different logistics, even if you want to kind of say, while the left brain knows what it needs to do, but it almost like it's not meeting where the soul is at that moment and speaking to where it is, which from the upper world, hurry up, and when can you become a productive human being again? And I think that's, again, that period that, you know, because now externally with our eyes, we don't see fallow fields often anymore in farming. It's obviously all trying to be as productive as kind of possible and agriculturalized. So that fallowness, when we feel it in ourselves, it feels off, because I don't see it with my eyes around.
It's against the conditioning, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, and I think that almost in that time in the underworld, you know, many people have felt it. It's like whether like sadness that can feel generational. It's not something that can so easily fit into like a unit of time on your Apple Mac calendar. Like the underworld doesn't keep 9 to 5 office hours, you know.
That's true. And what is the pomegranate down there? What is it?
Yeah, well, I think that there's many different interpretations. There's interpretations you can look at for the amount of seeds that it contains, and why is it in this myth as much as like the tarot card, you know, of the high priestess? What does it kind of symbolize? And I think it's almost like the seed, and I think that each of us, they can be universal as we know meanings of things, but to personalize it, and what does that mean? What does the seed of the pomegranate actually mean for myself? And I'd ask that to the audience as well. It's while it's great, say, even in dreams, we have these beautiful dictionaries, but what's your own taxonomy, your own, what does a butterfly mean to you? What does a dragonfly mean to you? Even though this might be the universal meaning. And I think with that pomegranate, it's, for me, obviously in that myth, I feel, you know, and maybe this can lead on to the next topic where myths are kind of going. You know, most of the myths are like, she didn't have a choice to eat the seeds. And again, it's like, well, no, what if as an act of agency she did? And I feel like that's where, not that we now go back to these myths, or even in the sense of that dreaming, present continuous, but these myths are now for us to reimagine them. And so what does the story look like if she ate the seeds to piss off her mom, rather than, oh, it was something that she was coerced with, and so she's a passive victim? You know, what is it if, you know, Orpheus didn't look back, and Eurydice, joined him. So I feel that that's where myths, it's not about that we study them and again concretize them as, what's that saying, like once upon a time. When we say anything like that, what we're actually saying is once upon a now. So it's like the once upon a now in these myths. And can we reimagine and use our intuition and, our inspiration to be able to see, a bit like the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, multiverses with different ways of how the myth could have gone or could be. And then could we live into that, or have a conversation about that, or take agency and action out of a different ending?
So they're not fixed ideas.
Well, I think that they govern, they can structure, they can influence, but it doesn't have to have that fixed rigidity. And I think that now, even in our world of, we will have online lectures and we'll have physical, it's the blurring of them. So it's less the either or and the both and. Yeah. And I think that that's, again, I know you were asking earlier about, well, what myth am I living and where did that come from? I think previously it was like, I have one myth and that's my myth for my life. And I'm just like, well, now I think it's more that pick and mix in this. And I don't mean it in, I know that some people would say in pick and mix ideology and say
that's not good. Someone would say
that's not great, because it's like a little bit of Kabbalah here, an ayahuasca retreat there, a yoga there, a bit of like esoteric Christianity, a prayer here. You don't ride a faith through its ups and kind of downs by learning what it is to actually have faith. You're just cherry picking the good experiences.
But on the other, it could be polytheistic. On the other hand, that to be poly is to have access to many different styles and tastes.
Yeah. Because in one's esteem system, you might be like still the ugly duckling, not yet the swan, right? But in something, another part of your life, you could be Inanna that's returned from the underworld. So I think that we're always in the cycles in various stages, and almost the sense of being able to relate sometimes just to a character in a myth than just the myth kind of per se, or in its digesting the whole of it. And an example I often use is like, say, Penelope waiting for Odysseus in the unweaving. She's making her future by in the unstorying, the unraveling, like the future of education really is unlearning, the unlearning. And when we ourselves are having a moment of unraveling, frequently, myself, that idea that actually it's the very thing that's moving me forward, while the conditioned thinking is it's going backward. And so there's something about just that image of then being able to be with the weaver and weaving as an archetype and threads and things can then open me up to something different, rather than having to stick to the whole myth of Odysseus from beginning to end.
Yeah. Opening up the imagination. And I think Thomas More, I remember him saying once that he thought the whole of therapy was bringing a new imagination to things, and that's what that's doing, isn't it? And I know this is a very shorthand question, Kristina, but what other figures rock your boat? What do you think of? Do you, out of the pantheon? So.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the ugly duckling myth is still something that's very prevalent in my life in that sense. But I say a bit like we were kind of saying, it's not one, or like it's not like I'm Athena and I'm Artemis, like not even in that I am kind of sense. But the blending, and I think the getting out of this binary thinking, like the Jung, hold the tension of the opposites and what's the third. And so I think it's like, it's not the hero's journey, it's not the heroine's journey, then what's that third? And I'm interested in holding those tensions to be able to see what's that numinous that hasn't been there yet. But I would say, you know, like whether it's the trickster archetype or Sophia, there's certain, I guess, maybe coming patterns that I feel are coming back to us to be re-embodied. And I think that's the other thing about myths as well, is not about knowing them technically, but feeling the essence and the truth behind them, that there's a universal teaching there. But even more than that, how do I learn to perceive mythically or sense archetypally or have poetic imagination? So it's less about knowing the myths, but being able to see how the myths operate in the world and in me. And within that, I think the embodiment, I think that many of us, myself very much included, we're very disembodied. Their ideas at a very imaginal level, rather than lived and expressed in cellular and embodied in action and gesture. Yeah,
that's good. Well, I mean, I'd like to just get because very soon we're going to start talking about where myths are showing up in popular culture, hopefully, if you want to. Popular culture, movies, all of that. But I want to get on to the whole idea of, you're on the Joseph Campbell Foundation or playing a part within that.
I write, if they've probably seen some of my myth blasts that I've been doing for the last couple of years, which is again that sense of applying mythology. And I think it's that mythic lens that's what I'm really interested in, and to present day.
I just want to ask you one question, because it comes up a lot, like the hero's journey. I think I've seen titles beyond the hero's journey or something lately or whatever, but I think he gets a bit of a bad rap there, because to me, he's talking about the mythic journey. And if I think about Joseph Campbell, this whole idea of wandering out of your familiar world into the, it's really stayed with me, that image of, like, it's a mythic journey, which maybe is for all, you know. But him, I was speaking to Saffron Rossi, and she was saying that in the Joseph Campbell Foundation, that James Hillman's work is stored there, and Joseph Campbell's, and they seem like two different people. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Yeah, like some people, as soon as you say the hero myth, they're going to have a bad reaction, aren't they?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I would put me probably in that category as well. You know, I think there's that, you know, it's that myth light, like LIT, like Diet Coke kind of sometimes version of myth. But within that, and I did go to Joseph Campbell's library in California, but primarily because it also housed Maria Gimbutas. And she's probably the most famous Lithuanian in that world of her work with the goddesses. So I was very intrigued to see their relationship, Joseph Campbell's and Maria Gimbutas's relationship that was there. I think for many people, the aversion can sometimes be in that it's like very masculine, very solar, you know, in a way quite linear, when at the moment the world might be, we might say more feminine, more lunar, more process orientated, more non-linear, less individual, more collective. But again, as I said, it's not either the hero or the heroine's journey. What's the story for our times now? And I think, I know in all the myth blasts last year that we wrote, there was the focus on decentralizing the hero. And we can see that now in regards to, again, it's very easy to go to the binary, especially say with the war in Ukraine at the moment, like, you know, very easy to do the who's the villain and who's the hero. But in the sense of what is, and I think just another sometimes reaction people might have is that, and we've known people, say, in addiction that have never got out of the stage of the belly of the whale. That so often it's the perfect version, the idealized, the aspirational, when it's very nonlinear. It's not that it's always one complete kind of journey. We can get stuck, as I said, in the belly of the whale with the addiction for years, and some people might not ever kind of come out. So I think that it's almost the aversion that some people people have is, well, like, what does it mean to kind of be a hero? And I think that, and it's more actually, what is the relationship that I have with my soul? And that there's a lot of, whether mythological or even mystical texts, have described what that relationship looks like.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's also about, how do we allow new voices into the space? How do we also, I mean, we were speaking earlier, so often people always quote Jung or Hillman or Campbell for their ideas. How can we learn just to stand in our own ideas? This was my own experience. It doesn't always have to be footnoted and attributed. And I think that, you know, like Jung being married to an heiress, many people have a red book inside of them. But if you're, say, a single mom with 3 kids trying to get food on the table, that descent, it can't happen in the way that, say, with Jung, someone else was putting food on the table, or Emma was doing this. So I kind of feel that so often we don't know the context of where something is written. And we see that, I mean, just to bring it to modern day, we might see a lot of people go to leadership lectures, and the presenter might say, like, risk it all, like just whatever, put everything into it, and like no safety net. And then people don't even realize that this person has a trust fund. And so it's really easy to say, like, trust it all. And so I think that that's again why I didn't fell in love with myths, because they allowed the frailty of the human condition to be there. It was really, I saw the suffering as much as the divinity of what it means to be a human being, without always wanting the, like, toxic positivity or the perfect bow ending or how to present my best self in there. It was like a being with, and in that being with, that relational dynamic, something within me changed, and I held myself and interacted in the world in a very different way. So when myself, obviously coming from a refugee family, I can see, I feel more like, you know, Cinderella when she's the scullery maid scrubbing something on the ground. I can see that pattern, but know that it's not the whole of me. Yeah. And then when we can give that to also somebody else, I think that Carolyn Mace has this beautiful term, the holy witness, that when we can witness somebody in their story and their suffering, and that it lands a bit like in indigenous cultures, something happens to you, you just tell the story 3 times. And often we always tell it to someone else, another friend, embellish it, go online and tell it, because it was never received. And if it was really received, we would have processed it, and we wouldn't need to create another narrative that doesn't support it or supports an illusion. So I think that receptivity to the myths is something beautiful. And I think that's what we learn in the underworld, that, you know, to me, the intuition is not the 6th sense, it's our 1st sense, and how that then starts lighting our way. Sorry, very long answer, I apologize.
No, that's good. And intuition, yeah, or instinct, maybe a little bit more animal instinct in a lovely way.
Well, I guess I'm very, with my archetypal work, I have given lectures obviously at the Jung Society in Sydney, but influenced by Carolyn Mace and her work on the survival archetypes. So the child, the victim, you know, the saboteur and the prostitute, not the person on the street corner, but how we sell ourselves for safety and survival and security in the physical world. And obviously where I am in Lithuania at the moment, almost very right next door to a war, you know, impending ecological crises, maybe a potential recession, that survival aspect of ourselves is really animated. And so to be able to see that in myself and others, to recognize almost when the shadow of a pattern has someone, and what is it as myself as a holy witness that can bring maybe an aspect of the light or the more constructive element or the grace of the pattern to bear, not just the challenge of it, to become more integrated and to become more balanced. And I think that's why we instinctively love the myths of the seasons, because of the balanced And it's not that it's like 50-50 or 33.3 times 3, but always balancing ourselves to the moment of now. Yeah.
And sometimes maybe that, you know, earlier you were speaking about knowing all the details of myth, or being clever in myth, if you want to call it that. Or sometimes it's esoteric maybe, but somehow becoming more human as kind of the thing.
Oh, absolutely. And just seeing the sufferings of the gods. It's like it's not like me on this singular individual isolated journey lost at sea, but with Odysseus I can ride on the back of it. It's where like the personal meets the mythical. I think that's like, you know, then how myth becomes this psychological cradle to us. And I think that that's why myths are so powerful, because in a sense, it's not like we identify as I am that character, but we identify with the experiences that we've been through. And it's actually in the de-identification, I have the wisdom. And it's why, like, so many of us, we can give brilliant advice to our friends. We're like, we should be a counselor. I'm top notch. I could be a Esther Perel, like, you know, whatever we think we can be in the way that we give counseling advice. But it's, again, because it's not ourselves. There's that third person, that third party. And I think myth gives us that. And I think that when we see a story in, like, I know, film, and it's archetypally the character, it resonates because there's the character arc of you know, the true aspect of the dark
the resonance too, the resonance with my soul.
Yeah. But it's because if it's really well done archetypally, that actually, because we're seeing an element of us, but knowing the storyline, going, oh, this is familiar, that any breakthrough, any epiphany that character has, it will also belong to us because of our ability to identify with that aspect of ourselves. That's why it's so powerful. And I think that, again, myths give us the ability to have that observer lens. You know, some of us myself also struggle with meditation, how to be the observer, you know, but there's something when you read the myth where you can just go, I'm not Persephone, but I know that experience 100%.
Yeah.
And then out of that, how does she find and navigate her way back out? And actually, oh, could that be my path too? And might there be an element of, and I don't think it's always about finding out and finishing it in a sense, but by being mythically, say, with, you know, when Psyche's doing some of her tasks, and say I've got too many emails and I'm still in that sorting and that discerning, even just that awareness of when I'm overwhelmed, oh, there's an element of discernment that's missing here, and that I need nature, the ants, to help. Even just that can shift my whole perspective on dealing with my emails entirely.
Yeah, that's good. Well, maybe that brings us to some movies.
Yeah.
Where do you see things popping up in our culture? Or what movies speak to you lately? Or
well, I used to always say, like, I think that futurists, the best futurists are filmmakers, because they give us a vision to live into, right? There's we're seeing it with our eyes, hearing it, placing ourselves in the experience of it, especially now with the IMAX and surround sound. So it's not something that the future is at a distance away. It's like, again, it's in the nowness. It's now here. So within that, I think that and you know, the storylines in a way coming out of Hollywood are of multiple versions of futures. So whether it's like we had Contagion, or whether there's like the Armageddon ones that are kind of there now, but I think that what we're struggling with is, like, with all macro narratives currently in crisis, we're in this story gap. We need stories that show the power of the collective, but still allow and embrace the individual within that. And I think one of the best examples of that was Sense8, which, you know, done by siblings that obviously created The Matrix. With Tchaikovsky's, in the sense of, for me, sensate is again that idea where there is the individual story woven with the collective. One doesn't exist without the other, and it gives us a new way of being, a new way of being. But of course, with Barbie at the moment, we can see that that's Inanna. It's like there's the modern reinterpretation of the Inanna myth. But then I think what they give us is the ability to question also ideas and themes such as like death and rebirth. I, like probably many others, loved the Queen's Gambit because of the actual truthful display of certain patterns. So whether it was the addict or the orphan or the genius child or the mystic, something that definitely resonated with me. But it is interesting of why certain filmmakers will come up with ideas at the same time. There's something in the consciousness that wants to kind of be expressed. And again, I think it's first we need to recognize what's the narrative I'm telling to myself about myself before we can co-create a new narrative of what it means to be a human being. And I think what a lot of the films are showing at the moment is what is humanity's role in the cosmos, in the galaxy. So not just like, oh, am I a human being, or is it, oh, I'm a galactic being, and what does that do? And that then blows out certain mythologies that might say particular religious figures were born on particular days when a calendar doesn't make sense in the cosmos, if that makes sense. So, and I think that it's the felt experience that movies often give us of the trajectory or of a pattern of what does it look like. And obviously just commenting on Barbie, of that, what, like Inanna, how she has to go through the 7 gates to be completely stripped and like hung out on that peg there. There's this one scene where she can't move her arms and she's fallen over, and like we've all been there. We know that so intensely. And so I think it's this, myths can hold us in a different way, by not the alchemy of your lead and your gold, but the alchemist is the one that can provide almost that vessel for the transformation. And I think that's exactly what films do.
That's very good. Well, that might be a good place to leave things, Kristina. But I want to thank you so much for so many of your insights and sharing so much. That's great.
Yes, I often feel very nervous about these things, as we were saying earlier. I myself trying to not speak from prepared notes, like really trusting the moment of what wants to be said. And before, I used to be a very like, I'd finish this and I'd be like very would have, could have, should have. I should have said that, mentioned that, this myth, and why that. And now more trusting that what needed to be said in this moment was said, and that it'll be received by those that actually needed to hear it.
Yeah.
And trusting that imaginal mythic archetypal realm, that certain myths, archetypes, and characters and storylines will find people when and as they need. And the turn
that can change. So, you know, that might be different last year than now, and 6 months in the future could be something completely different, some other theme which comes so important.
And always like reorientating yourself to that. And that's what I'm saying, that getting out of this idea, what myth are you living? It's almost like, can I live mythically? Yeah. So I think what myth am I living? I've got to work out like it's this, and then that's life. And
you were talking about identification with the myth. It's got its own kind of little dark side, hasn't it? That, you know, I am Venus, or I am Napoleon, and I am Cleopatra, but more that the power is in the I am, not the whatever the thing is. So it's like, if I can recognize that I am,
then I have almost like the conscious choice to say, and I've now identified with this particular behavior or kind of attribute, and can then drop that just as easily to then have an I am connection with another part. So yeah, I think it's like getting out of this idea of rather than what one singular myth am I living, but how can I perceive mythically and perceive multiple myths that also might require a reimagining for the world that we want to live in. So whether more cross-cultural, more inclusive, and more in a sense that what it means to be a human being is very, very alive in the myth, not just myth, you serve me, heal me, fix me, do this for me, but that I'm a co-creative participant in this mythic realm. And that is almost a sense how that the myths become alive in us again, but that we recognize the extraordinary power we do have in the way that we engage with others and the planet, and also our relationships with ourselves.
Well, the jargon might be co-creators, which is an old phrase, but it's something nice about it. There is something lovely about that somehow the myth needs us. We're not having the myth, and we're not doing it through the ego, but somehow to work together.
So saying, okay, is it Prometheus? And well, now we see that in AI, and that's like that's very literal. But there's something very different if we can just sometimes ask ourselves, like, what's the Promethean spark that I need for myself? I've got a full day ahead of me. I've got lots of, what's that Promethean spark that I require? Instead of always saying, well, AI is just a Promethean, like, in that very left brain way. And so I think that, again, it's that, the future is not thought into being, it's sensed. And so when we can get out of this Cartesian, like, I think, therefore I am, rather than I sense, therefore I am. Yeah. Can we sense the presence of Demeter maybe around us at the moment? Yeah. So it's that sensing function. I think that we become more, in a way, mythically aware. As I said, the archetypal I is there. There's more that poetic imagination. The life beyond the senses becomes something more tangible. And in a way, then we are more open to, as we started the conversation, the unknowing, the ambiguity, the fragility of life. We do then start orientating our perception and our experiences in a very different way once that fragility, vulnerability, the unknowingness, the unraveling has touched us.
I remember Kristina Hillman said once, people should study myths so they don't become fanatics. And, sometimes I think about ideology up in the daylight world. It's like it fills the vacuum, whereas in the myth, in that, or so much what I get from what you're speaking about today is that there's always that sensing, that complexity, that ambivalence, and that becomes an important thing. But then I like this idea of the animal, the animal senses, the nose, the eyes, the ears, the experiencing. It's there's something beautiful about that,
I think just what you said is like myth almost gives us a larger container. They say that trauma occurs that, say, if I've got a cup here and I'm pouring it, and it's like it just overflows and I can't kind of process it. But I think what the myths and the archetypes give us is the process to like enhance it. It's not a cup, it's a saucepan, and then becomes like a bucket. Like there's this wider part of it that we can hold. And, compassion, it comes from, the Latin to encompass. Can I hold more? And in that complexity, can I just hold more of it? And then trusting in the tension sometimes of the holding, or the frustration, or the depression, but in the holding, that there is a wisdom that will transubstantiate in a way that's then necessary for individuals and society and the planet's growth as a whole.
There can be tension in the holding, but I like what you're saying about being, hopefully to be able to hold more of those, and to be patient.
Other people's pain, more witnessing capability. Can I hold that more, and not in a way that I'm frustrated, I've got to but actually in the more that I can kind of encompass. It's almost just the sense that you can always already feel the eyes relax, the body, it's not this we're a little less out of that survival mode. And then in that, I think there's more of the chance for the divineness, the divinity in all of us to be present.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.